So thanks for the talk again. I got a question directed towards you. So when you're talking about the qualitative aspect of retrieving data, I mean, obviously you even give the example about going out, the people don't even have internet access and finding out information about them. What type of, I guess, parameters, or like, when do you know that you have the right amount of people, the right amount of sample to determine something with it? I mean, obviously you have a number of questions, but was there something that kind of governed the qualitative research to where, like, okay, we have enough to kind of move forward? Because I could just see that going, a lot of different ways.
Yeah, there are pretty different norms. I mean, you're obviously not going for statistical significance when you're working with a small number of qualitative respondents. Often it's, you might interview 8, 10, 20 people, but each of those interviews could be like, 3 hours in depth, like going through their life story up to the, motivation, understanding people's motivations and backgrounds and things like that. So it's a much kind of like deeper but less, numerous form of sampling. So I'd say, different people have different ideas about like what is enough. I mean, one rule of thumb that's sometimes used in UX research is like when you stop learning new things, like go ahead and stop. Like if you've heard, the same patterns of responses, like, oh, I get stuck like in this phase of using this app, or this is a blocker that I have. Maybe if you start hearing those multiple times, maybe you've covered like 80 or 90% of the top issues, maybe. There's also some notion of like deliberately, I believe the term is purposive sampling. So the idea that if you know that like you care about the opinions of men and women and wealthier people and poorer people and people in urban areas and people in rural areas, then you design your sample so that you've got like people who represent kind of different intersections of those characteristics. So you have a little bit of representation across a broad kind of demographic space. Doesn't mean that you necessarily, like, you still could get like somebody who's super idiosyncratic and not at all representative of other people with that background, but that's sort of the way it goes. So I mean, I think of the qualitative work as more like not definitively identifying every possible issue, but more like surfacing things that you didn't know you didn't know.
I come from a sociology background.
Okay, so this is probably all very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Question.
Hi, I'm Salil. I have a question for Nidhi. So I've recently started exploring into this data science space. It's a very basic question. So what would you recommend for a new guy like me to be an aspiring data scientist? What steps would I take generally to get this job?
Well, personally for me, doing a data science bootcamp was super helpful to speed up the process. So yeah, I didn't have a much background about coding or in general in the tech industry before at all. So yeah, I started with some Coursera courses to get a little bit basic about data scientist stuff. But then I applied for a bootcamp and had like a super intense 3 months period that prepared me for various aspects about the field. And that was definitely also, it was great to get like a lot of connections from that bootcamp as well. That helped me a lot for getting jobs for sure. And yeah, like if you're interested, it's a kind of a big topic, but I'm definitely happy to like talk afterwards as well.
Mention the name? The name of the boot camp? Galvanize.
Yeah, so actually, yeah, it's kind of like happy coincidence here. Like out of 8 of us, 3 of us are from the same boot camp, which is the Galvanize, used to be called Ziphian. So yeah, if you're interested, I'll be really happy to talk about it as well afterwards.
I actually have a question to the other 3 people who probably went through like PhD for 6 years or something, right? So not for you, but I'm currently still a college student, but I feel like 4 years is still too long for me. And I guess like Galvanize, for example, lets you become a data scientist in 3 months, whereas PhD or our college system kind of trains you to become a data scientist in 10 years, right? So what is like your opinion about your like experience you got from doing research in academia, and like versus like maybe some taking the alternatives such as like taking courses on Coursera or like doing boot camps such as Galvanize.
So yeah, speaking as somebody who spent far too long in school, my response to that is, yeah, it's definitely not necessary or probably even recommended to go and get a PhD to do data science, unless you have like a very specific sort of thing you want to do. So for instance, if you really want to use data science with regards to sociology or something like that, that might be useful. Or if you wanted to really like do statistics and like really get into the deep bowels of like machine learning or something like that, then it could also be useful. But my PhD is in math, and what it has helped me with is being able to like feel confident like asking and answering questions. So I'm fairly confident like going out and like working alone and like trying things that people have done before and like being somewhat confident that I'll come out the other end like being successful. But I don't necessarily wouldn't recommend spending way too long in school to do that.
Yeah, I would just add. I mean, I think one of the cool things about our data science team here, and also like teams I worked with at Facebook, is people come from really different backgrounds, and people have like some people are straight out of school, some people are straight out of school after college, some people are straight after 12 years of grad school. Other people have like really interesting work backgrounds, and people bring different things that I think becomes useful in surprising ways. So it's like all sorts of different types of experiences can lead you to be a good data scientist. And so I would say like there's not one true path. I mean, I think boot camps and programs like that are a way to sort of get a really rapid induction into a lot of core techniques, or you can study them for 6 years in grad school, or you can go learn them learn them on the job in some cases. So I think there are a lot of different paths, and I think on our team we have people who have followed a number of these different paths, and we all contribute in different ways based on that history. So I kind of like that aspect.
Yeah, I guess I can add a little bit because I'm kind of both. Like I don't have a PhD, but I did a kind of like a really intense, like research intense master and then the bootcamp. And I definitely feel that there's a lot of transferable skills from my master's that helped me greatly with what I do here. Like I was studying zoology, which seems really different from what I do now. But I get a lot of practice of dealing with really complex systems, as all animals and all cells do, and that helped me greatly from just like grasp a complex system quickly. And a lot of also like stats for sure, or a lot of like analytical thinking from all the research experience training that was really helpful for my job right now. I think, like personally for me, I feel like if I didn't do my master and jump directly to the boot camp, I probably would not be here. So it's definitely, I think a lot of things like definitely follow what you're interested in. If you're just directly interested in like data science itself, it might be like a lot of things you can just learn on the job as well. So it's definitely like you're doing different things, and different background can provide like a lot of various aspects for our data science job that you probably didn't think about when you were doing it.
Hello. Okay. So I'm an up-and-coming data analyst / scientist. However, I would like to know of the various techniques or some up-and-coming techniques you're learning right now, like random forest algorithm, like simple thing like A/B testing or anything like that. What's the most common type of technique or tool that you've utilized? And then do you see yourself utilizing that tool in the near future, or like does it just alternate depending on the task? To Tim, whoever, or the whole panel.
So for me, just like even basic hypothesis testing, something that comes up like all the time, and it's one of the first things you learn in statistics. Again, it's like so useful.
Yeah, I was going to say A/B testing personally. I think we A/B test most things that we build here, and that's something we use. Like, launching new A/B tests and like analyzing A/B tests most days It's pretty ubiquitously used. I think that's not going to go away.
I'll put in a plug for descriptive statistics and visualization. I think that's often underrated, just to understand the lay of the land before you go in and like build a complex model or something. I think a lot of people want to jump straight to like some fancy machine learning approach, when often like the first thing you should do is like just look at the data and run some sensible summary stats, make some plots, see what it looks like. And maybe from there that'll suggest like what next paths are reasonable.
Yeah, I think most things are covered here. From kind of like a newbie perspective, I feel like I learned a lot from the bootcamp is like for the machine learning part. And before I started this job, I thought that was what data science do. But then when I'm actually on the job, I realized there's so much you can do, like you can learn from the data without doing like fancy machine learning models. Like yeah, what they covered is like surprisingly helpful as well.
I will say one more thing about the models. So I had one of my professors at Berkeley was this kind of somewhat curmudgeonly statistics professor, and he taught the graduate class on statistical models. And the entire message of the class was you should really never use statistical models. Like you never meet the assumptions in practice. This is all bogus. Like here's how you do it, but don't do it. So.
So I'm a software engineer working in the healthcare space with the AMA to basically integrate healthcare systems. And one of the things we're looking to do is basically tie the physicians together in these disparate systems and get them to collaborate more effectively. And you guys are building a collaboration tool. I was wondering if you guys had created any models or had anything, learning lessons surrounding these models that demonstrated effective collaboration, and which ones I should be reaching for first. You don't need to give me all your secret sauce.
Yeah. Do we have good? What? Yeah. I think you might have us stumped. I mean, I don't know. I mean, one thing I would say is that we have a lot of, we have a lot of ideas about sort of things that we could investigate, like ways we could understand collaboration better through behavioral data. I would also say like a lot of our work is also just kind of building out some of these new metrics, and I think like as our team grows and we continue to do more work in this space, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do some more perhaps kind of like generalizable research that will speak to some of these general questions about like what is effective collaboration. I think we have some sense of that from our data at kind of a very micro, like within Asana scale, but that's different from like what's generalizable to a network of physicians, or like how you could learn something from that. We do have some friends in academia who are doing some really cool stuff with like, networks within workplaces and things like that. So there's certainly some great academic literature out there as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to maybe talk about like our account health score and how, how we went about redefining that and what those metrics look like? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so the account health score, the goal is to understand like the health of an account, just like it sounds. And so what's an account? An account is some entity, there's some organization that is using Asana, specifically paying for Asana in this case, like in the simple case anyway. And the goal is to understand, right now, what is the likelihood of this organization being successful at using Asana? Are they still going to be using this, a month, 2 months from now? And if not, can we help them, and how can we help them? So we don't just want to say, hey, like we had some like old model, like from a very just a naive, simple thing from way back, which was essentially, are they doing well, yes or no? And if no, well, they're not. That's all. That's all it would tell you. And now we did something a little more sophisticated, throwing like a bunch of features like random, sort of a modified version of random forest. And so we can understand, if they're not doing well, why? What features it, what's trending down, so we can give information to our customer success team who will interact with these organizations, and say, hey, this is not going so well recently. Here's some tips I have for you. Have you tried this? What about this? And so on. That's sort of the goal. And
more questions?
I used to work for a now defunct social network, and we always had the problem of sampling for testing network features. So in the context of A/B testing, if you had messaging or chat or something like that. So I'm sure that, well, I know that Facebook has the problem because they published about it. I imagine it as a complicated version of that with groups, organizations inside their user base. So how do you sample them? How do you pick the B sample?
So there's a couple things that people have done. So A/B testing, you're right, is kind of hard. I think the complicated solution to your problem is like trying to like take the graph of people and trying to like cut it up into pieces somehow. So do some sort of clustering algorithm on like network graphs and try to like put it into people, and then you can like sample from those like groups. I think the simpler thing to do is do something like just divide up countries. So it turns out that connections within countries tend to be a lot denser than connections like between countries. So I think at Facebook there was a thing that like I think it's New Zealand, always saw the future. Because every time, like I say, they're an English-speaking country, they're pretty similar to America, so you just always like launch a feature in New Zealand first and like see what happens.
I think the exact phrase was New Zealand sees a possible future, because some of those things might not be rolled out more broadly.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, the only problem is that that's exactly how we did it, right? But the problem is that if we tested in the United States, we would go immediately in the red. So that was kind of, we could never put the United States in the B sample because it would freak out. I mean, upper management would stop sleeping. Right. So we tested Colombia, the poor guys, and we never knew if it would work in the United States. And it's a problem. Those big countries should be smaller. Okay, you should make them up.
We'll get on that.
Sounds nice. Hey there, so I'm one of those qualitative researchers who takes the other side of the pair, and one of the things I'm certainly interested in the sussing out, talking to people in depth, and figuring out, oh, it's the kernel of truth, whatever. That's kind of the dream, right? But I think the other side of the dream that I'm really interested in is how do we create structured qualitative data that becomes an input? And I'm curious if you guys could magically, you don't have to say how, have some qualitative input that constantly comes into you from Asana, that you could know one thing magically about people in a structured way. What one thing would you want to know that would unlock, make sense of data that otherwise you think you can't make sense of?
That's a really good question. I think you're saying if we could be sort of magical fly on the wall, understand what Asana customers were doing, in a given moment or something.
So you could measure the or you could measure the or the delight, or those are really obvious ones, but if you could only have one dimension of qualitative experience that you could somehow magically know and correlate with whatever's going on, what would you want to know?
I don't know. For me, I would like to. Maybe that's not one magical thing, but it's what is their experience within those first 5 minutes after sign up, right? That's the point where Asana is not providing you any value. You're trying to figure things out, what is going on through their head. I recently had the privilege of watching my girlfriend use Asana for the first time, and it was just no, don't do that. No, what are you doing? Stop it. So seeing that for a wide range of our customers would be actually fairly interesting.
Yeah, kind of on a related note, I think, there was actually a blog post from Facebook. It's called Aha Moment. It's also something we were discussing within ourselves. We really want to know whether there's certain sets of actions that our users do in the app, give them kind of this aha moment. It's wow, yeah, this app is actually really useful, and then that gives them inspiration to keep using the app. That's definitely something we really want to know from qualitative research.
I had one more question here, if that's all. I was wondering, I don't have a question, but I was wondering if there is a score, binge worthiness, for Netflix, when people get addicted to a movie. Can people get addicted to a software like Asana?
Some of us might be.
Thanks so much for talking about boot camps, and I'm glad to hear that they're successful in getting you guys jobs because I'm about to graduate from one tomorrow. And so I'm thinking about the transition back to working life, and I'm curious about that ramping up process. Like, what was it like your first 3 to 6 months at the job? What's different, I guess, here versus the stuff that you learned in boot camp? And also, do you have any advice for someone who's looking to make that transition easier? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the really important, well, there's so many reasons I chose this company, but one of the really important reasons is the great mentorship here, which helped me greatly from the ramping up process. So here we have basically one-on-one mentor. Each of us is assigned with one of the data scientists, or the new member will be assigned as another member on the team. That kind of holding your hands through the first few weeks. And like he's always available for questions, and it's like we do like a lot of pairing to do different various projects to get to really familiar with it. You can ask questions right away when pairing someone with somebody else. So that was like super helpful. Yeah, I think for me something really important is thinking about what size or what type of companies that you are applying for as a first job. Yeah, there's definitely a whole range of companies, like huge, big size ones, whether like your job could be just like doing one specific thing, like building one recommendation system was the job posting I saw when I was looking for jobs. And also there's a lot of other companies that you might be actually the first data scientist. So for me, I was really looking for a good kind of sweet spot between that. There's some like really good senior people on the team that I can learn from, but also it's a relatively small companies that can get a touch of all the different things within the data science fields. That was super helpful for me as like a first data science job for my career. So here each of us do a bunch of like analysis, but also get a taste of the data engineer. So we could do a whole range of analysis, like machine learning, A/B testing, and like building the ETLs, and like you learn to use Spark. So yeah, it's some like great coverage of data science skills. I think that's really helpful for the newbie like me.
Hey guys. I'm actually from upstairs, so I'm at datanerd.com, and so I usually work on our philanthropic data projects for nonprofits and universities. But I want to ask specifically about tools and languages that you guys use. You break it down through, you're talking about data visualization, you're talking about maybe data integration, or how you do your data engineering, like ETL and all that. Like, maybe can you talk about buy versus build, or do you guys build all your stuff in-house, or what do you guys do?
I guess I'll speak a little bit to this. So we use a lot of different tools. I mean, primary language is Python. Almost everything that we do is in Python, but I think Andrew here is pretty fond of R, and we don't stop him from using it.
Yet.
Yeah, and then for visualization, I think people use Jupyter Notebook, which I think is, I don't really use it, but I think everybody else pretty likes it a lot. And then on the other side, we use, for Spark, which we just started to play with, we'd be using Zeppelin, which is also like a pretty cool like visualization querying layer to that. And Scala, I guess. Yeah. Did you want more, or is that it?
That's good, thanks.
All right, we're gonna take 1 and 2, and then we'll break up, and y'all can grab the stage.
Hi, so my question is very simple. What is your, or what are your biggest challenges you're facing right now as a team of data scientists in your work? Thank you. Eric.
Well, I will say one sort of non-technical thing, which is, we've gone from 3 people at the beginning of the year to 8 people now. And so I think just, as Lily mentioned, we do a lot of, we focus a lot on kind of onboarding and mentorship and stuff. So I think a lot of, certainly for me, coming from Facebook to here, it was a big transition and a lot of new stuff to learn. So I think as a team, having brought on so many new people just in the last year, we have had a lot of kind of ramp up and learning time. And I say that particularly for myself, figuring out sort of the lay of the land and new environments and stuff like that. I'm sure there are some more interesting challenges we can speak to as well. No?
Yeah, so one thing that is challenging is thinking about, well, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what the future of data infrastructure looks like at Asana, and it's just, there's such a wealth, I guess, it's a time to be a data scientist, I guess, and such a wealth of new tools and things you can do, and figuring out what you want to use and why, and if this is the way to go in the future it's an interesting problem, and I'm kind of excited to tackle it, but it's also just a challenge because you don't want to go down a wrong path and have to waste time backtracking.
Yeah, I sort of want to say, what I'm hearing from Paul is that there are a lot of options on this infrastructure side. And I think more generally, just there are a lot of questions and open-ended things we want to do. Some of these projects small, some of them potentially endlessly large. You can spend 2 weeks on it and do a little bit. You can spend a month on it, 12 months on it, do a lot. And maybe it's some years-long project where you can seriously invest in multiple people for years. And knowing what to pick here when there's so many between small and large and potentially incredibly impactful things is just challenging.
Yeah, I guess, talking about the theme of today is, data for a rapidly changing product. Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the challenges here, that our product has been changing so much, year after year, and also the user base, the user numbers are changing so much. So we need to constantly thinking about new data infrastructure to handle new scale of data, and also the new usage pattern could, when I think about historical patterns, it could be actually a complex suite of different actions, maybe different in history from now. So it's just a lot of things are changing all the time, and so a lot of you always encounter new problems and new challenges, which is actually a good thing that you never get bored here. Yeah.
We'll take one last question.
Hi. One more thing about the PhD, please. So, I'm a foreigner, and I have working on my thesis abroad, in another university, and I have made a lot of investigation, but there it looks like another way we're doing it. So, what is the best way to do it here, starting on the same investigation, because it is really done, to find a university, to find a professor, to publish their papers, or maybe there are some other tricks that you're no, in this case. Thank you.
I think we might save that question for after, just for the PhD students to address that, just because it might not fall for the whole audience. Was there one last question?
Yeah, I had a question on productionizing machine learning. I was wondering if you had any kind of models or anything live in production, and what goes into deciding that okay, this is the thing that we want to have in production, and we got to devote some resources to it to figure it out.
So the account health score we talked about earlier is one such model. There was a lot of iteration, a lot of testing, a lot of internal testing to different feature sets, sort of amongst ourselves, looking at this, looking at we would develop one model, look at many sample cases, see how it panned out. We find odd behavior on some extreme cases either side. Accounts, domain organizations we thought were doing well, thought were not doing well. How did it show up? A lot of sort of testing among our team, and then among sort of us plus our customer success team I was referring to earlier. Showing them, hey, here's this model. Does this make sense to you? Do you see things that are confusing or surprising? And then iteration, development of new features. Sit down and have discussions. Well, what is it that you think about when you think about an organization and their health? What is it you're talking about? What are some problems you might see? And developing features around that. Just a process of a lot of iteration until we finally reached something we were happy enough with, sort of internally, and also we had like an evaluation criterion for scoring it. One of those things where we were happy with those, and we shipped that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists. That was wonderful.